Group Force Reporting. Group Force Reporting consists of the members Ricky E. Caracol Jr., Glenn Ovalo, Carlson M. Colambot, Enriquez Christian McLean M., Flores Manuel Jose Y. The Social Identity.
Positive distinctiveness, social identity theory, offers a motivational explanation for in-group bias. First, judgments about self as group member are held to be associated with the outcome of social and comparisons between the in-group and relevant out-groups. Second, it is assumed that people desire a satisfactory self-image and positive self-esteem. Positive self-evaluation as a group member can be achieved by ensuring that the in-group is positively distinctive from the out-group. Usually, group members will engage in social competition with out-groups to try to make the in-group positively distinctive. For example, in minimal group experiments, people show a consistent bias both towards maximizing in-group profit and toward maximizing differential profit in favor of the in-group. Even when the total in-group profit suffers, the theory does not argue that material considerations are unimportant, but the symbolic meaning of groups' position relative to other groups is a powerful motivating consideration. So, social identity theory considers how group membership is incorporated into our self-concept and how this affects our views of another members and non-members of our groups, as well as members of rival groups. So, the theory has been used extensively in considering in-group favoritism and out-group discrimination, but has received only minimal attention with respect to substance use. So, especially, social identity has been found to moderate the influence of other substance on substance use. For example, perceptions of the prevalence and approval of drinking among other members of one's group have been found to be more strongly associated with one's own drinking when the individual identifies more closely with the group. Identification with others' argument augments their influence on us. In considering social groups among high school students, an athlete should be more influenced by other athletes, whereas drama club students should be more influenced. So, social identity is an individual's indicates who they are in terms of the groups to which they belong. Social identity groups are usually defined by some physical and social and mental characteristics of individuals. That's all.
Social Identity Theory.
Is social identity theory. Social identity theory is a person of who they are based on their group, memberships or membership. As individuals, we exist a variety of groups make us. Now, we will meet theorists Henry Tajfel and John Turner are the brains behind social identity theory. As social psychologists, they were interested in understanding how people interact and exist. So, their conclusion, social identity theory that the in-group will discriminate against the out-group to enhance their self-esteem or self-image. Now, what is the in-group? The in-group is the group of individual wants to be a part of the favorite group. So, what is the out-group? The group of individual does not like or doesn't like want to be involved with. In other words, the in-group is the us, is the us. and the outgroup is them. There is a clear distinction based on favoritism and derogation in Touchbell and Turner and integrated theory of intergroup conflict. They broke down social identity theory into three components. So let's start the one of the components. So categorization. Social categorization deciding what groups the individual belong to. Individual decides what group or groups they belong to. An individual can belong to many groups at one time. Second, social identification, determining how compatible the individual is with a group. So, identification in identification, an individual determines how compatible they are with the group. They have to make sure they fit in within the norms of the group to see if they should join. The third is social comparison, making comparisons between the in-group and out-group to enhance self-esteem. In this process, an individual compares themselves within the in-group to an out-group to enhance their self-esteem. In this process also helps maintain their self-esteem, which is a form of loyalty to their in-group. In the cognitive process of social comparison, we also see the development of prejudice and discriminatory thoughts because of our competitive nature as humans. It should be highlighted, though that touch about understood these consequences, but he viewed groups as a positive and the social comparison aspect of social identity theory would lead to the improvement of individuals for the overall improvement of the group. So I have an example about in group. So the example is when they are an individual Mexican gangster meet a group of Mexican gangster, so he or she is belong to that group. And also the example of our group is when there is a super religious individual and meet a group of Mexican gangsters, so it means he or she is not belong to that group because he is a religious one, and the other group is a gangster, not a religious group.
Education and health.
Social standing. Social identity theory suggests that individuals tend to categorize other people on the basis of characteristics such as educational attainment as a means of self-comparison. Differences in relative standing, whether due to less education or less wealth, can be a source of anger, envy, or stress. The long human history of bloody wars fought over social class such as the Bolshevik Revolution suggests both that these feelings can be powerful and that they can have direct consequences for health and mortality. It has been suggested that the modern manifestations of lower social standing include both internalized psychological disruptions and crime. This hypothesis was initially drawn from heavily confounded ecological studies assuming that effects of income inequality or on mortality and crime, but it's not now supported by a strong base of outcome measures and research in science. So the idea that social status affects health came to light in studies of government workers in England. These studies found that among persons with good jobs in the same government department and equal access to healthcare, occupational class was still inversely linked to premature mortality. More surprisingly, this health gradient extended all the way into white-collar jobs. Even those with high-level jobs were at greater risk of premature mortality than those in the most prestigious jobs. Similar ingredients were subs- subsequently found for income education, and these gradients have been observed in a wide variety of cultural and economic contexts. In fact, it is possible that the social prestige conferred by an educational degree is more important determinant of life expectancy than the skill acquired with each year of education. When do groups with a victimized past feel solidarity with other victimized groups? So, distinctiveness threat. Social identity theory posits that people strive to achieve and maintain a sense of positive distinctiveness for their group membership. Positive distinctiveness entails feeling both valuable and distinct other groups. The drive to view or in groups favorably makes initiative seen from a self-esteem perspective, but distinctiveness also serves an epistemic function. Group membership allows us to know ourselves by making into group and out-group being compared are too similar. The insufficient contrast between groups towards their value as tools for self-knowledge. When they are too similar to us, the distinction between these categories ceases to be meaningful. This dilemma is the heart of distinctiveness threat. People experience losses to in-group distinctiveness negativity, part because these losses can arouse anxiety about the in-group's future viability as a separate entity. Social identity theory predicts that group members' responses to distinctiveness loss, such as cultural assimilation, will depend on their degree of identification with the relevant subgroup. Low identifiers tend to assimilate more readily, and high identifiers tend to resist assimilation by showing greater self-stereotyping and in-group bias.
Gender awareness, identity, and stereotyping.
Good day, everyone. I'm here to discuss about gender awareness, identity, and stereotype. First, let's discuss about what is gender awareness. So, gender awareness is the ability to view the difference in roles and relations between women and men. This process of gender development starts in early childhood. Infants, as they develop, learns ways to distinguish men and women through cues that they see and hear. Common cues that helps an infant distinguish men and women are facial features, voices, the length of their hairs, and clothing. All of these, among many others, helps an infant distinguish men and women. As an infant grows, they learn new cues and informations to help them distinguish the gender of the person in front of them. For example, infants as young as 3 to 4 months distinguish men and women using facial features, and by 6 months, an infant distinguishes men and women through their voices, and as they reach 9 months, an infant can now distinguish men and women through their hair and clothing informations as their gender cues. So now let us move on to gender identity. So what is gender identity? Gender identity is your deeply held inner feelings of whether you're male or female, or both, or either. As a person grows and have the base and awareness of what man and woman is, they now seek to know their own gender. There are factors that influence gender identity, like social and environmental factors. To understand it better, let me give you an example. A girl is growing up in a mannish environment and being surrounded by boys most of the time. So as, so as she grows up, she views herself as a man instead of a woman because of growing being surrounded by men. Gender identity isn't set in stone. Understanding self takes time, and it's normal to change your mind many times about how you define and express your gender identity. And now let's move on to gender stereotype. So what is gender stereotype? Gender stereotyping refers to the practice of ascribing to an individual, woman or man, specific attributes, characteristics, or roles by reason only of her or his membership in the social group of women and men. To make it simple, you are being dictated about your gender based on the standard and norms of the society. It means that if you are a woman, the society expects you to be a woman. The society expects you to be feminine, not aggressive, gentle, dependent, talkative, sensitive to other people's feelings, emotional, verbal, kind, nurturing, and easily hurt emotional. So the society expects you to be those because those are the standards that the society sets for a woman. And if you're a man, the society expects you to be a man. The society expects you to be masculine, aggressive, independent, dominant, tough, not easily hurt emotionally, rarely cries, and less emotional. So if you're a man, the society expects you to act like a man. And if you're a woman, the society expects you to act like a woman. So those are the traditional gender stereotypes that are set by the society. And that is all. Thank you.
The personal identity.
What is personal identity? Personal identity can simplified be understood as the sense of the self that an individual develops as he grows older. This is not something that is static but something that is ever changing in life. However, when it comes to basic personal identity creation, the individual tries to comprehend who he is. Where does he belong? What is important to him? Every person has a form of identity of himself. Based on this, he has a way of seeing himself. Some may see them as achievers while others may see themselves as failures. The experience, the context, the people we associate all play a huge role in the formation of personal identity. However, it is the vital that our conception of identity may not be aligned with the social conception of self. For example, we might conceive that we are good-natured and helpful to others, but the social perception can be completely different to this. Personal identity deals with who we are as an individual and what distinguishes us from the others in the society. Personal identity refers to subcategories which define the individual as a unique person in terms of the individual difference from other persons. Some aspects of our personal identity include our skin, ethnicity, religion. A lot of the time, our race and ethnicity play a significant role in how we see ourselves, especially if we feel that we are different from the majority of those who live in the same community. What is social identity? Unlike in the case of personal identity where attention is paid to the difference of the individual from others, in social identity, a collective approach is established. According to Richard Jenkins, social identity can be understood as our understanding of who are and who other people are and reciprocal others people, understanding of themselves and others. In single society, can be people belonging to different religions, ethnic groups, classes, and others. Through the creation of social identity, the individual learns the difference that he sees in others and also the similarities with others. This takes place through interaction in the social setting. The roles and responsibilities that an individual has in the society are also important when understanding social identity. Social identity groups are usually defined by some physical, social, and mental characteristics of individuals. Examples of social identities are race, ethnicity, gender, social class, or socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, disabilities, abilities, and religion. What is the difference between personal identity and social identity? Personal identity Personal identity can be understood as the sense of self that an individual develops as he grows older, while social identity can be understood as our understanding of who are we are and of who other people and reciprocal other people's understanding of themselves and others. Characteristic of personal identity and social identity. Emphasis. Personal identity, the emphasis is on the individual, while social identity is the emphasis is on the commonalities of members in the society.
The intergroup relations and culture.
Group relations and culture. Identification and strategies for escaping an unsatisfactory social identity. A central idea in social identity theory is that the biased intergroup comparisons are directly linked to a social identification. Presumably, the more important a group is to its members, the more biased group members should show in its favors. However, in many studies, there have been rather unstable correlations between group identification and in-group bias. Hinkle and Brown suggested that the psychological process proposed by social identity theory might not be operative in all groups. They hypothesized that this would depend on prevailing level of individualism or collectivism in the group or group members on the one hand, in their inclination to engage in intergroup comparisons on the other. The group comparisons may be more important for relation groups and less important for autonomous groups. A strong link between the group identification and in-group favoritism would be expected only in groups simultaneously characterized by collectivist and relation orientations. Some support has been found for this idea. Status groups, the outcome of available group comparison is often negative for their self-esteem. One reaction to this is simply to leave the group, and there are many examples of members inferior groups distancing themselves physically or psychologically from their groups. Such an individualist strategy of social mobility might not always be possible, especially for group boundaries are relatively fixed and imperable, as this case with many ethnic and religious groups. In cases such as this, social identity theory suggests that a number of other avenues may be pursued. One is to limit the comparisons made to the other similar or subordinate groups. Another is to sidestep the main definitions of comparison to either invent new definitions or change the value of existing definitions. These ways are expressions of social creativity. Yet another route is to directly confront the dominant group's superior by agitating for social economic change. Which these tactics will be chosen might well depend on the prevailing social climate. If it is such that no real alternative to the status quo may be conceived, subordinate groups are unlikely to openly challenge the existing order and attempt social change. A key factor in generating social unreset among subordinate groups is a sense of relative deprivations, either in relation to their own groups in the past or in relation to the dominant group. The implications of broader social and cultural influences for intergroup bias are discussed further in the next two sections.